Welcome to Rising, everyone. Happy 2020. I have to say, I've really missed you all. I'm very excited to be back. And we have a special treat today, which is Marshall Kosloff in for Sagar and Jetty. Great to see you, Marshall.
Great to see you too, Krystal. And it's great to be here, everyone. Sagar wanted me to promise you all we have an amazing show for you today.
That was the one instruction that he gave Marshall. You must say those words. And the truth is, we do have an amazing show for you. So first of all, we've got new fundraising numbers out this morning. Bernie Sanders in particular and Andrew Yang with eye-popping numbers. We're going to dig into that. We've got a podcast host, Jamie Kilstein, on to talk about whether there is a crisis of masculinity. That'll be very interesting. And we also have a top Andrew Yang surrogate from South Carolina to talk about Yang's ground game in that state. But we've also, of course, been following developments overseas, as I'm sure you all have as well. Of course, protesters storming that embassy in Iraq, creating questions about what exactly we're doing vis-a-vis Iran. Meanwhile, we're waiting for a potential new missile test from North Korea. And Marshall, as I've been thinking about all of this, what really occurs to me is how little we've discussed foreign policy at all in this whole campaign election season. I mean, you've got Joe Biden, a front runner, who is deeply flawed on foreign policy, has been part of like all of the worst foreign policy disasters in American history. You have Elizabeth Warren, who's a front runner, who's barely been asked a question about foreign policy. Pete Buttigieg, same deal. You have Bernie Sanders with a sort of diametrically opposed position in terms of his foreign policy stances. None of this has really been discussed in the national debate at all so far in 2020.
And it's crazy because foreign policy is the area where presidents have the most actual control. If we're talking about the economic questions that everyone's focused on or the social issues, the one issue that any president is going to have the ability to make a difference on is going to be foreign policy.
Right.
Whether you're going to see that, President Trump's legacy is going to mostly be foreign policy related. His decisions about NATO, the decisions about North Korea, or the decisions about Afghanistan and Iraq, it's actually crazy that we're getting this far into the campaign, but we're not focusing on it.
Well, and there are a lot of things, and I'm interested for your view on this. There are a lot of areas in which President Trump doesn't seem to really have a coherent ideology, kind of goes with whatever the prevailing winds are. Foreign policy is different. I believe he really has a firm stance of let's get the troops out of the Middle East. And yet, despite actually holding that view, he's completely failed in that regard. I mean, we're still in Afghanistan, we're still in Syria. Now we're talking about sending more troops into the Middle East to deal with the situation vis-a-vis Iran. And what that really says to me is that it's not just about the views you hold, it's that you have to create a whole apparatus around you and be willing to bear the costs of actually changing the sort of bipartisan foreign policy status quo. He just hasn't been able to pull that off. But what's your view on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with your point about his instincts. He's been very consistent about thinking our allies aren't supporting us the way they need to be. He's been consistent about not understanding why we are in Iraq, why we're in Afghanistan. And I think a lot of the issue that you're getting at is just the point that the administration itself and the people who support him, whether that's the Secretary of State or that's the actual bureaucracy in the White House itself, they don't agree with that worldview.
Yeah.
So I think anyone who's going to run for office and they actually hold the view that our status quo isn't working, that they're not quite sure why Afghanistan is still the way that it is, they're going to have to bring in a team of people who actually agree with that and actually implement that. But the other broader problem too is that it's easy to hold these beliefs. Like President Obama ran on disengaging us from the Middle East, but then things happened. The Arab Spring happened. The rise of ISIS happened. With President Trump, he wanted to pull out of Syria. Turkey invaded. Then you had the chemical weapons attack, and right by the Syrian regime itself. So you're going to have to both have the team, like you said, but also be aware of the fact that circumstances and events aren't going to cooperate with you.
And be willing to bear the costs, because what will happen if you go against that bipartisan foreign policy consensus is all the national security state will leak to the press on you, tell them how you're soft on terror, tell them how you're leaving the American people vulnerable. So if you do not have a firmly held belief and the willingness to actually bear some political cost for changing the direction, it's not going to happen. I mean, they will just destroy you in the press. You won't stand a chance. But I do think, on Biden in particular, he loves to, first of all, he's never been honest about his support of the Iraq war. And this was a guy who he wasn't just another vote in the Senate for it. I mean, he was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He was part of helping Bush to build the case for this war. It's one of the most significant foreign policy blunders in our history, certainly in modern history. And he's never had to fully answer for that. people all love to say that foreign policy isn't a significant part of the, Americans' vote on domestic policy, et cetera, et cetera. It's just not true. I mean, Hillary Clinton lost to Barack Obama over the Iraq War decision, right? Donald Trump ran explicitly against the Iraq War vote and decision and called Jeb Bush out. And it was one of the seminal and most important moments of his campaign. So this idea that people just don't care, to me, it just goes completely against the facts.
Yeah, and with Biden, it's actually sort of weird but where his instincts are going to lie, because as he's been very clear, he opposed the surge into Afghanistan when he was in the Obama administration.
Right.
So he obviously has the terrible Iraq War record that I think a lot of people from that era of American politics are going to be held accountable for. Hillary Clinton obviously was, Jeb Bush obviously was. But I think that Biden is going to sort of be a mixed bag, because in many ways he's disagreed. He's had a 40-year career. He's disagreed with a lot of the foreign policy decisions that I think you disagreed with. But on the other hand, he has had this conventional instinct. And if you see his comments on the rise of China, I think you see his comments on trade, it's actually not quite clear where his instincts are going to lie in either direction.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, I'm going to tell you what's on my radar. That is next.